Okay, so I'm gonna, I mean, hearing all that, it's a bit dizzying and you think, oh my gosh, PFAS are all over, what can we do? So I'm gonna give you an optimistic message of what we can do with some examples. So we know about the problem of regrettable substitution that Rob referred to, how on the left we have the C8, which was voluntarily phased out in 2015, only 50 years after DuPont scientists first pointed out the harm in 1965. It took 50 years to phase it out because these chemicals are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. And the replacement is C6, looks very similar in structure, and it is equally a forever chemical, bioaccumulates in plants. We're learning increasingly about the toxicity. They're smaller molecules, so they move faster, and filters that take C8 out of drinking water, often the C6 will go through. So that's a regrettable substitute. We've also heard that there are tens of thousands of chemicals out there that are used in industrial processes and consumer products. It takes years of scientific research and advocacy to phase one out, and it's often replaced with a regrettable substitute. So what we've come up with at our institute is to sort these chemicals into 6 classes or families that contain the majority of harmful chemicals in everyday products. And this is a way to start dealing with them. And I'm going to give you some success stories in some of these different classes. Now, I encourage you to go to 6classes.org. We have 4-minute videos about each of the classes and an introduction. So in a half an hour, you can learn about each class, where it's used, why it's harmful, what you can do to reduce your own exposure, and a success story, some of which I'm going to share now. And as you can see, when a chemical's in these classes, they do have useful functions. So we don't say never use them. We say, are they really necessary? If you say to a mom, you know, you can have a white shag stain repellent carpet, but it's going to be sprayed with a chemical that's going to be in your child for a long time and is harmful, she might not think it's necessary or worth it. But if she really does want a white shag carpet, you can drop Coca-Cola on, ask, is there a safer alternative? And that's where green chemistry comes in. So for PFAS, they're problematic, they're difficult to clean up. Once they're out in water supplies and the environment, you can't bring them back. So prevention is preferable, and that means stopping the use in products. And I'm going to give you a few positive stories. As scientists with our colleagues, in 2017, we wrote a paper finding that fluorinated compounds were in nearly half of the fast food packaging of several hundred samples. We spread the word widely, and Senator Blumenthal wrote letters to the CEOs of the major fast food companies. And we since heard that as soon as this happened, these companies realized when they saw our paper, they realized they were going to have to get out of these chemicals. They looked for alternatives that had good function and were affordable. And for example, McDonald's just announced they're out of, and Wendy's, I think, are out of all PFAS in fast food wraps all around the world. So we went from paper to communication to action and change. Another example, as Tom referred to, is carpets. Carpets used to be said to be the largest exposure for children of PFAS. They crawl on the carpet, put their hands in their mouths. And we brought together the major carpet companies. They came to Berkeley to learn about the science. And they thought they'd switched from C8 to C6 and they'd solved the problem. And they heard a number of scientific voices, also voices of some of their big purchasers of carpets saying, you haven't solved the problem. You all have to get out of PFAS. And they all kind of had to do it together for places like Lowe's and Home Depot that sell carpets and really don't differentiate. And they did decide they would all together, we said, join hands and jump out of PFAS, which seemed like a horrible thing at first, but they got used to the idea and they did. And they said by January 1st, 2020, they would all be out of PFAS. And when Home Depot announced they were not going to sell rugs and carpets containing any PFAS, that was because the companies had decided to, and scientific research contributed, which we like to see. A great story is Keen shoes, water-resistant shoes. The company made a commitment to remove all the PFAS. They looked at all the Keen shoes and found 101 places in their shoes there were PFAS. And then they looked, and 70 of the places weren't necessary, and they removed them immediately. But it took them, I think, 7 years and many millions of dollars of work to find replacements for the other 31, and they have been successful. They recently ran a full-page ad in the New York Times encouraging the rest of the outdoor shoe industry and the outdoor industry to move away from all PFAS, and connected to a blog where they shared exactly their process. So other companies could do this without spending 7 years and millions of dollars, do it more quickly and effectively. So that's a very encouraging story. A lot of manufacturers, notably IKEA and Crate and Barrel, who we've worked with, moved away from all PFAS based on the values of their companies. Others moved away with a little push from Greenpeace, but all these brands have stopped using all PFAS in their products. If you're as interested in PFAS as we are, we think it's really a very important topic. We have a website, PFAS Central, with the latest news, scientific papers boiled down to an easily understandable sentence or two, policy around the world, events. So please go to PFAS Central, and we have our PFAS free page where we list brands or lines of brands that say on the website that they are PFAS free. We do not test them ourselves. So briefly, antimicrobials is another class that has really been overused, particularly since the pandemic. They're used in a range of products: personal care, paint, food storage, flooring, apparel, kitchenware counters, so many uses. Two that were used a lot were called triclosan and triclocarban. And way back in the 70s, the FDA noted that there didn't seem to be a benefit and there was a potential for harm. Washing your hands briefly with an antimicrobial really doesn't do much good. You'd have to wash your hands for several minutes, and people don't. But they go into the wash water, they're persistent, so they end up in aquatic organisms, and they come back to us. A study of human breast milk found antimicrobials in most samples. So the FDA did say that you could no longer sell soaps and body washes containing these chemicals because the manufacturers had not demonstrated that the ingredients were safe or more effective than soap and water. And so they were phased out, triclosan and triclocarban. However, right after the phase out, we went across the street to CVS to see if they were still in use, and they weren't. But instead, there were chemicals called quats or quox, quaternary ammonium compounds, and nanosilver in the products. And they similarly have aquatic toxicity, persistence, could possibly contribute to antimicrobial resistance, and do have big data gaps and health problems. So unfortunately, again, we have regrettable substitutes, which is why we think you really want to move away from the whole class when it's not useful, if there's not a benefit. And there does not appear to be for a lot of uses of antimicrobials. They're there for marketing. And this is particularly a big problem right now with quaternary ammonium compounds. Flame retardants, another class of chemicals used in television cases, building insulation, textiles, a whole range of uses. And they're there because there are standards or codes requiring them. And to stop the use, you have to change standards or codes. And that is incredibly difficult because when you try, you discover, we realized that the nation's furniture, the foam, was 5% by weight toxic flame retardants, as were a variety of children's products containing foam and that there was no fire safety benefit. We came up with a new standard that would increase fire safety by stopping fires in fabric before it reached the foam. And there was huge opposition from the flame retardant producers, but with a lot of work, you could hear a little bit more in the 5-minute video, we and our colleagues were able to change the flammability standard here in California, which is followed across the US and Canada. So if you go to buy a couch now, it's very likely to have a label like this saying contains no added flame retardant chemicals. So this was a big deal, getting flame retardants out of the nation's furniture and foam containing children's products. Again, this was based on a lot of scientific research and papers and people listening to the science. A less successful effort that I know a number of people in the audience helped us with was foam plastic building insulation, polystyrene, polyurethane, polyisocyanurate, which makes buildings more energy efficient as an increasing use, is de facto required to have harmful flame retardants. And so we wrote a paper making the case that the flame retardants did not provide a fire safety benefit and were harmful. And the flame retardant that was used, it's called HBCD, hexabromocyclododecane, was phased out in 160 countries based on, again, bioaccumulation, health harm, persistence, and unfortunately, it was replaced with poly-FR, which is a mixture of butadiene, which is a carcinogen, styrene, which is a carcinogen, all wrapped in bromine, and given names like Emerald Innovation and Greencrest. And that's unfortunately the flame retardant that's being used now in polystyrene, that's EPS and XPS. And in most cases, it's not needed. There's no fire safety benefit. We had an assembly bill here in California back in 2013 allowing insulation without flame retardants when there was no benefit. For example, below grade, where you it's between cement above and earth to the center of the earth below, no oxygen source, no source of a fire. This did pass in California. It took till 2019 for it to pass from the bill to regulation, but the California Building Standards Commission did vote to allow flame retardant-free insulation below a concrete slab back in 2019. But when we went to the International Residential Code to allow flame retardant-free foam below grade, there was huge opposition from the producers of the flame retardants and their allies, and it was defeated. So this is a less than successful story, but I want to share it just to thank all of you who helped. And I saw a number of your names in the audience, and we've put this on the proverbial back burner, but if anyone's interested in working on this, please do get in touch. So if you'd like to learn more, we send out newsletters monthly or quarterly where we give you the latest news on the 6 classes, reducing harm from chemicals. And we will be talking more about building materials. So if you go to 6classes.org/newsletter, and then I'll repeat Tom's message that for healthier materials, you should ask for ingredient transparency. Ask, is this function really necessary given the potential for harm if it's a chemical like PFAS or in the 6 classes? And ask for safer non-PFAS alternatives. Beware of PFOA-free. PFOA hasn't been made in the US since 2015. So when someone says proudly it's PFOA-free, you know that it probably has a regrettable substitute like C6. A new similar term in the outdoor industry where they call PFAS PFCs, people say it's PFC-EC free. That means it's free of PFCs of environmental concern, i.e. there are other PFCs there. So please do share the report, share with us in the chat or email or in conversation other uses of PFAS you found in the built environment. And as Tom said, alternatives are especially appreciated. And please do join us. We'd love to have a small group discussion and hear your ideas. So please add your email to the chat if you want to chat with us and contact us. And we'd now be very happy to answer some questions. Thank you.